Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello.
Got some prompt individuals here. It's good. Is my thing making noise or is it just green to be green?
I think just because you were the last person, you're
Oh, okay,
good.
good.
I
I
can't
was
hear
like,
anything on my
can you
end.
hear the AC? What's going on? Hey guys.
Hey, Cody.
Hello.
Howdy.
Let me get our screen going and we'll just wait a few more minutes for more people to join. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. We're just going to get started in a few minutes. When you guys go down to your Zoom toolbox on the bottom part of the screen, do you guys see a Q&A button?
No, I don't see that. Oh, it's under the more if it's not in
It's under
here.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, love it. Yeah, you guys are going to want to click on more and make sure that is up and running. We will be answering questions at the end. But as we go through our learning lab, please feel free to put any questions you may have in there, and we will make sure to get to those at the end.
Also, if you click Q&A, then it stays in the toolbar. So it might be helpful if you hit more and then click Q&A, it'll stay down there in the toolbar.
All right, well, I will kind of slowly kick us off. It's 3:01 on the dot, so people are still coming in, but welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining and taking time out of your afternoon to be with us. This is our second learning lab as a company. So we are RSM Design, if you haven't seen that yet. But we did one of these learning labs last October, and I know many of you guys were able to join us for that. And that was kind of your first introduction to us. So if you're here for the second time, thank you so much for coming back. It's great to see you. And then if you're here for the first time, welcome. As I said a few minutes ago, we do have a chat feature that if you click on your toolbar at the bottom, it is either in the toolbar or click more and click Q&A feature, and it should stay in your toolbar. And if it's not working, please feel free to use the regular chat feature. And we'll be taking questions throughout the session, but we will start answering them at the very end. So please add your questions as they come to mind. This session is titled Building Branded Spaces That People Love, Real World Design Conversations. So kind of a continuation of our conversation we had back in October for our first learning lab. But I will get us rolling here. I spoke a little bit about what Learning Lab is and what it means to us, but our core purpose for Learning Lab is to educate and inspire the next generation of designers, people like you guys, to bring brands and life through meaningful, people-centered environments. We want to share practical knowledge and real project examples and experience with you guys, so we can further learn how to connect brand, place, and human experience. In a few minutes, you'll hear more about our company and kind of what our core focus is as a studio. But I wanted to introduce the people on this call from our team, RSM Design. We have Cody, who is principal and Los Angeles studio director, as well as Jonah, who's a brand designer. We have Ray, who is a senior designer here at RSM, and then myself, but I will turn it to Cody and have him introduce himself.
Awesome. Thanks, Holland. You hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, again, I'll kind of give another welcome to everybody. Great turnout. Really appreciate that. So yeah, again, my name is Cody Clark. I lead our LA studio. I also work kind of across all the offices and different capabilities, from design to operations, and a lot of different methodologies. A little bit about myself. I've been a designer and slash educator. I have taught at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena here in California for about 22 years, ranging from typography, letterpress printing to traditional screen printing to spatial graphics and typography.
Then I'm Jonah Latisick. I have been a designer for around 10 years. Went to school for design at Biola, if any Biola crews out there. And yeah, kind of studied art and design, and then started working in design post-college, was in and out of studios and then on internal teams, and then have been working here at RSM for just shy of a year now. So.
And I'm Ray Peterson, senior designer. I've been at RSM for about 5 years. It was my first job out of college. I went to LCAT. I think there's a few of you guys on this call, which is super fun to kind of be on this side of the screen. And I work on the EGD side at RSM, and I've also been mostly structured around hospitality and things like that. So I'm continuing some education too and learning more about interior design to bring that more into our EGD space. But super excited to share a hospitality project with you guys today.
Nice. And then my name is Holland. I am RSM's marketing manager. I've been here for maybe just over 3.5 years. While working at RSM, I work out of our San Clemente studio, and then I went to Point Loma Nazarene University. And then I will turn it over to Cody.
Awesome. And we'll just kind of fly through a little bit of just introduction, which helps kind of set the stage for environmental graphic design, or as Ray said, EGD, right? So at RSM, the only thing we do is really brand and the built environment. So branding, signage, graphics, placemaking, and art programming. And at the root of how we do it is we tell stories. And really it's about uncovering a unique story from every space that we design. And how do we transform that narrative across the course of an entire space? We've been in business. Next year will be our 30th year. All the partners, we all kind of work together at another large architecture company. So we come from an urban planning and architecture background. We try to make sure that we're weaving design into those spaces really thoughtfully and meaningfully. We work all over the world. We've worked in most states. It keeps things really fun and fresh for the design team. For us, just like from an education standpoint, is whenever you guys are working on projects, you start with a vision. Like, what's the overall mission statement? How do you tell a story? What story do you need? What story do you really want to tell? We do the same. So it comes in a lot of different fashions, from deep research to really understanding what's the character of the community. How do we really get in touch with the users that are going to be occupying and using our space to make sure that they're everything that we're building is created with that vision and is built on meaning. Again, designing with purpose for us, we center everything, and I'll have a slide here in a second that talks about more principle-centered design. But we want to make sure that everything we design has a purpose. So we deal with context and people. So you want to make sure that you're really understanding the root of what drives people, what's the motivation that people have, and what are the needs that a space might have. And as we start to layer in kind of multi narratives into space, from kind of media side to more static work to more artful and placemaking work, you start to see these different contexts that come into play. And we're constantly dealing with context, from architecture context to historic narratives to even spatial context. So that idea of really understanding the quality of space and how people are using it is the fundamental of how we're really designing and shaping those narratives within them. We always say, like, every space has a story to tell. And that's so true. Again, we work all over the world. I have projects in India. I have projects down the street from the office. And every space has a really amazing story to tell, and the people that are there that need to have that story told. So we really spread that out over a lot of different kinds of work. Ray, was saying she's going to talk a little bit about hospitality project. I'm going to talk a little bit about a retail placemaking project. And again, we work in every practice group. And at the root of it, we're trying to tell stories. Like, how do you connect people to a place and that's meaningful, and where they can find loyalty and pride in that place, and maybe learn something new and enjoy themselves kind of along the way. So our design process is very similar to what you would find kind of academically that you guys are learning, very similar. It's just ours is a lot faster. So in school, as an educator, right, my projects would last 7 weeks, sometimes 14 weeks, which you guys are probably familiar with. And you're drawing out each of these stages. So you're really learning how to move from one step, what's critical in one step, and how do you build on that? And you start to then build on that for the next step. Our process is the same, but sometimes that's hours, sometimes that's days. And you're starting to really uncover, again, this idea of really defining what's important. So at the beginning, we have a lot of communication with our client and our consultant teams. Sometimes we're one of 10, sometimes 15 consultants that are working on a particular project. And so that means that we are a bridge to understanding what's really important about the priorities of a project. So whenever you guys are working, whenever we're working, it's a very similar approach, is defining what's really important. And then we're researching that. So we're really now building on that initial narrative and that initial vision. How are we doing deep research? How are we doing kind of innovative ways to get at the root of, like, the essence of a community or a place? Sometimes those are stakeholder engagements. Sometimes those are surveys. Sometimes we're meeting people directly in workshops. And then we're kind of building then all of that. We're flowing all of that through the design process, ideation, the creativity process. But again, for our process, we're not just doing it out of a vacuum. We're doing it in context. So we're always, as we're learning about the project, we're also learning what's the nature of space. So all three examples that you're going to learn today is how are you building these narratives, but you're tethering it to the actual space in which you're designing. And again, as we go through multiple stages of developing those designs, and everything is again in unison with our client and our consultant. We are just one team, a part of many teams, and making sure that we're kind of going through that process of making sure everything's coordinated and detailed specifically. And our last phase is really debrief, which is, as a company, we love to learn. And at the end of every stage, at the end of every project, we want to learn and we want to grow. How could we do it better? Did we listen to the client enough? Did our outcome prove to be valuable for the community in which we design? That's super important to us. We want to make sure that the way we started the project is the way we end, and we're learning at the beginning, we're learning at the end. I think I'm going to hand it over to Jonah. Jonah will talk about Plaza Americas, which I always have a tough time saying. I think that there should be actually an extra vowel here somewhere, but I'll let him go through this.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk through a brand design project that we did recently, and just kind of bring to earth some of the things that Cody was talking about, and show you how that kind of plays out in a brand design as we build that brand design. So a little bit of the project background of what this place is. It's called Plaza Americas. It's a retail and cultural destination, so it's basically like a mall, but also mixed with like big box grocery store and a bunch of different like cultural amenities that all center around this idea of Latin American culture. It's in South Houston. It's serving, again, this Latin American culture. There's a huge array of Latin American like heritage that's there, which is really cool. And kind of the challenge of this project is working with developers who, they said this of themselves, that they don't have a creative bone in their body. So really like talking design language with people that don't necessarily have design language. So being able to serve design, but also serve the client and kind of be the middleman in that space. And our role in the process. So this was kind of the scope of what we did. Cody was talking a lot about vision and the storytelling. So that was the first phase of the project. The next phase is brand identity, which is like the nuts and bolts of the project, the like color palette, the logo, the type, that kind of stuff. And then the last part of it is signage design. So that's translating all of those previous things into like a map or a wayfinding design or like a restroom sign, that kind of stuff. So basically the question that we kind of pose ourselves is like, how can we take this whole scope and make it feel authentic through all of those touch points and deliverables? And you can go ahead to the next slide. And basically what we do with that is we make a system. It's not just a logo. It's not just a mark that we're going to put on everything. It's a system. It's a story, as Cody was saying. It's like, I think of this example of like, we all know Nike, obviously. And if Nike were to make a hotel, like we would know what that hotel would feel like walking into it. Like we'd know the materiality, we'd know the colors, we'd know like all these different things that are more than just the swoosh, but it's a brand. It's this living system of stuff. So that's what we're doing. We're doing that storytelling and making this whole living system. And a part of that living system is like this idea of principle-centered design. So basically what that looks like is we're moving from this idea of like just mood board and images of like, oh, I think this looks cool. And so I'm going to reference it, or in a lot of circumstances, just copy it, which is what we move away from, and try to extract the different things that we're seeing in those images and use those things that we can extract as motifs and design principles that we can use to inform the process. So what that looks like a little tangibly in the next slide is basically laid out here. So on the left side, we have the things that we researched. This starts with, in the bottom corner, I kind of use show the logos of some of the tools that I've used to do this process. But we start with research. We cast a broad net and see like, okay, what are different things in Latin American culture? So if you see the top one, like the papel picado of Mexico, that's like the Day of the Dead paper that they cut and make. And what we can extract out of that and kind of see these design elements are these angled shapes. There's this idea of like woven patterns, or like this step and repeat. and there's a lot of motion. There's also, like you'll see in all of these, there's a lot of color. And then same thing with these tapestries that are in Guatemala. We can extract from that these color relationships. Like those are really vibrant colors sitting next to each other on that lady's garment that she has on. But they're really refined. They're like, they all somehow work together despite being these like beautiful, vibrant colors. And we also like sometimes we'll take a look at contemporary artists, see what someone that is in the culture and they're basically doing that extracting, see what they're doing, what they're pulling from these things, and kind of pairing the tension of modernity, but also this cultural authenticity. And all those, the kind of the tools in the bottom right, using Gemini for like research, again, casting that broad net, using ChatGPT or Claude for same thing, like identifying the rabbit holes, not necessarily having it go down the rabbit holes, because that's where like we come in. And I honestly feel like we do a better job of like pulling images and stuff. Sometimes using Pinterest to again identify those rabbit holes and going down them, not necessarily for just like pulling them, because a lot of Pinterest is a very narrow scope of what is on there. And then Arena as well, a similar kind of Pinterest image-based platform, but without an algorithm. And so from that, we extract these things of the principles or the brand filters that we use to inform the project. So this idea of pattern and form, we have this narrative of a woven community. For some of the forms and the graphics that we're using, we have this idea of bold heritage. And then the color and line, like expressive line, how we're using that is this idea of vibrant expression. So you can see how we went from those images and then like extracted things out of them. And then we can put that into the storytelling element that we're going to use to inform the rest of the project. A huge tool that I personally have found helpful, and just a thing that I feel like RSM does really well, I know RSM does really well as a studio, is just ask, what am I looking at? Like if there's a project or an image or something that that the client is drawn to, really parsing it out and being like, okay, what about this image do you like, or what is it doing? If it's a pattern and the like that it's woven, or that the colors are really vibrant, being able to identify those things, to not take the reference and just copy it, but to be able to take what that image is about and then use that to inform the process. So then we kind of get to the fun part of sketches. We take those brand filters, like I was saying, the storytelling elements, and we apply those to sketches. So usually this begins, and by usually I mean always, it begins with pen and paper. It's just the fastest way that you can like get all of your ideas out onto a medium that you can look at and compare. And again, just always coming back to those brand filters, thinking about like woven forms like we have here, these kind of like intersecting and crossing like tapestry kind of visual language. And then we bring those into Illustrator kind of in the bottom right corner, and we build out sort of brand motifs. They're not like fully built out, but you kind of get the idea of where this brand might be headed. And there's spectrum within that. You know, there's like not just one like one brand that is right, that hits all those brand filters, but kind of a spectrum within that. So first initial exploration, then we usually, you can go to the next slide, we usually refine it down to like 3 motifs or 3 kind of mini brands that we'll present to the client. And as you can see, these are the 3 options that we presented to them. So each one of them, again, using that idea of vibrant color, each one of them using these like overlapping forms, that idea of like a woven community. And they all have like the same tone, but they're different takes on those brand filters. And then the client, of course, chooses one of them. And then we go to the next phase, which is refining that brand. So if you want to click ahead one. And a part of refining that brand is getting other people's input. So I put here, like, critique isn't a threat to the work, it's a part of the work. And it's really holding these designs that we've made very open-handedly, and letting like other people kind of influence that. I have an elephant in the background as an example of like, if we put an elephant in the room, someone might look at the ear and be like, oh, it's this floppy skin looking thing. And it's gray. And then someone might be looking at the leg and be like, what are you talking about? It's this like massive pillar that looks huge, and it still is gray, but it's not the same thing you're describing. So we kind of take that idea of like, we're all looking at the same thing, but different takes on it, and taking that into account, and allowing for the change. So Then we get refined into like brand standards, and we look at the color palette, really work it out of how this brand can exist in place, in color, in social media, in printed matter, all that kind of stuff. So that's one whole brand, kind of walking you through how we do a little bit of our process. And I believe I'm going to kick it over to Ray, kind of seeing how brand design moves into environmental design.
Yeah, awesome. So the project that I'm going to be sharing today is called Black Desert Resort. You can go to the next slide. This is essentially a resort in Ivins, Utah. It's about 45 minutes outside of Zion National Park in southern Utah. It's a really massive property. At the core, it's a resort. It also has a PGA golf course. You can kind of see it going all around in that map view. And there's also all of these different destinations within this resort. So there's also residences, there's a pickleball complex, there's different kinds of vacation stays. For example, there's a golf vacation stay that's more for people who are coming specifically for the golf course. And then there's also a family vacation stay that centers around the water park that's going to be built there. And so the real problem of this project was, how do you expand a client given brand into a cohesive family of identities and signage that feel connected, but yet varied across the destination? So this brand that you see at the upper left corner was a brand that was given to us. And so a lot of the time we start with a project that has that brand narrative already built out that Jonah has presented before of our strategy. And so then we kind of have to put our cap on and see from their designer's perspective of where they were coming from and how they want the rest of the site to really sing from that starting point. And so how we do that is really looking at their existing brand and kind of dissecting some of these visual cues. So for one, it's inspiration and concept. That's understanding their narrative that they were coming from. It's their origin story. It's the emotional intent behind the brand. And we use those things to translate other items like shapes and structure of the signage. What kind of moments of delight and inspiration can we bring? What kind of narrative can we bring to the space? We also look at the visual identity itself. That's all the graphic elements, the brand, the color palette, typography, and all of those elements really inform how we use scale and hierarchy of the signage. Some of the geometry, is it angular? Is it organic? Does it feel more refined or playful? And then it's also the verbal identity, and that's things like the tone of voice. Is it more sophisticated? Is it more casual? Are there going to be different areas in the same site that feel more casual, like the family village, versus more sophisticated, like the spa and amenities? And so how we take an existing brand and start thinking about signage is really literally dissecting the brand. And they had a really great visual structure. And so their original bee icon, this was all inspired by the layers of the earth in the landscape that's nearby. And so we really wanted to connect the narrative back to that. And so we're really dissecting these different angles that are seen in their brand and seeing how we can use it in a way that isn't super on the nose. And so you can see we're taking out all of those angles, we're kind of overlapping them, we're turning them around to see if this can become the structure itself. And then you can see how that last monument design has been abstractedly formed from that brand. And then the next step of that is, how do we present it to the client and make it sing and really feel like this is something that they can visualize? And a lot of that is creating context. It's talking about materiality. So one of the big things that's really interesting about this site is it's landed in a volcanic area. And so there's all of these black volcanic rock, and we really wanted to use that as a differentiating point. And so we wanted to build these gabion structures as the monumentation itself and really fill it with those black lava rocks. So it's really an identifying feature of the brand and of the location, already beginning to give that narrative. And then there's all these other pieces, like we're using SketchUp to build all of these different pieces. We're using Midjourney to create some context in the background. We're using Photoshop to put it all together. And so this is also just a great page to show how we're using the same brand, but using different pieces of it. So we're kind of on that scale of how much of it do you want to repeat versus be varied. And there is an element of wanting it to be familiar, so everyone knows as they're exploring around the site, oh, here comes a sign, I've seen this family, I know that when I come across this design, it's going to give me some information. But you also don't want it to be too repetitive, and you want it to bring some whimsy and delight as you're going around the site. And so you can see how we're using the angles kind of in this pedestrian directional in the top right. We're using the lines a little bit more literally here and just adding some more texture into the panel. And then we're also using it more as a layered form, like the three, which is a level identity within the resort itself, and really projecting out those layers to kind of give that more visual identity of the layered stone. So that really took care of the resort center itself. But now we have all of these other areas that also need identities and also need signage. And so how do we construct this whole family, again, that feels connected but still varied? And so part of that started with us now creating new brands that still felt connected to their original client given one. And so all of these brands on the bottom are all the different residential properties that they're going to be having. And some of them are kind of a different vibe. Like Silver Reef is a little bit more of a family friendly. The Edge is more of a location where you can come and go on excursions. So it's a little bit more energetic. But there's all of these pieces that we're extracting from their brand, like the layered mark mimicking rock layers. They're using humanist typography, maybe a little bit more modern variants with the second. And so how do we continue that in these new brands? And so we've always created this sense of layered earth with the actual brand mark and are using different kinds of humanist typographies that have a little bit of a modern twist. So all of these, as you see them on one page, feel like they're a part of a single brand. And then, of course, we had to create signage for these pieces. So there's a couple examples for these residential properties of kind of how we're using those different pieces to create signage and not just put the logo on it, but actually using the forms from the logo to really influence the signage itself. So, for example, the Silver Reef, we gave two options of how do we use that pattern that's being created in the logo mark and use it in an interesting way within the forms of the sign. So is that layering these panels to give space for landscaping to be planted, or is it more of a tone-on-tone textural applied to some more of the features of the signage itself? So that took care of all the residential pieces. And then there were a few more amenity destinations of this project. And this is still ongoing. We're still working on this today, which is super exciting just to see all these pieces come together. But there's a few more slides of some of the things that we're working on. For example, they have a pickleball complex. And so we had to think about it a little bit differently again. And how do we use the angles in something new that we haven't seen? How do we create some more of these kind of iconic we call them Instagram moments with the large sculptural bee of people wanting to come when there's a big tournament and take a picture, but also have some messaging on it and just different ways, but you can still see it's part of the same family. And then we're also working on the water park. This is the most different from the rest of the sign family, and we wanted it to feel different as it's its kind of own entity, but you can still see different things like the materiality and some of the typographic moves that are happening in things like Desert Island, where it still feels one of the same with the surrounding site, but still makes it feel like as you're entering, you've entered a completely new experience. And this is just a great kind of overall page so you can see all of these things are happening within different areas or different brands under this umbrella Black Desert Resort, but they all still feel cohesive in a way. And then I'll pass it back to Cody, and he's going to be talking about uncommons.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray. So uncommons we've been working on in the studio for, I think, about 6 years. And again, a lot of projects happen quickly, like little gunshots that you blink and they're done. This is not one of those. So we're still working on this in kind of subsequent later phases. But it's a project just west. It's in Las Vegas, just west of what we know as the Strip. And it's really this is what it looks like kind of today. And the interesting part is go to the next slide, Holland, is when we started, this is what it looked like. So it was a brownfield that our developer out of San Diego purchased. And you can see kind of the Strip in the top part of this, aerial view. But the interesting part is we go to the next page is we work on a lot of projects that are not there. So when we first started talking about this conversation about context, well, there is no context, right? So I think that's an interesting thing is when we're getting in, we're working with architects. What's the vision? Again, we started with the vision. What does the client want this place to be? How do we start to build this idea of kind of it was a live work retail project. So it had a lot of current and future phases of residential. So a lot of people going to be living here. There was a lot of offices, and there was a lot of retail and like a village retail destination. So again, it's had to be a lot of things to a lot of different people, but we always start with that vision. Next. And for us, this is kind of a third variation of brand. Jonah's was, okay, we're going to develop the brand. Ray's was, we're going to inherit a brand and then build off of that. This is kind of similar to that, but the client came to us with a very rough, like bare bones brand and was like, can you work with this? Like we have a vision, we have a component, we have some sort of driver to it. Like we want it to feel like this. Can you figure it out? We're like, absolutely, no problem. So this idea of kind of uncommonality was really where the client wanted to start from. So everything we worked on from a design perspective had that idea of the unusual or undefined or unstoppable. It was kind of epic. It was kind of an epic way of building a brand. Next. And so for us, since there was so many different kinds of people, you had to design a lot of different kinds of spaces. So we work hand in glove with the architect and the landscape designer. The architect for this was a company called Gensler, which is a very, very large company. And then the landscape company. And again, we're designing these spaces simultaneously. So you're thinking, okay, well, you're the wayfinding and brand designer. How are you adding value? For us, we think about it is the experience. So who is going to experience these places? When are they going to experience them? So when we start to think about the thread of all these spaces in between the buildings, how do we, as kind of the experience designer, say, this space is a community space. It's going to be 50 people or more, and they're going to hold farmers markets on the weekend. They're going to have live music, on Friday nights. Or there's a solitary space where I can go and do yoga because I live here and I don't want to live at a mall. So there's a lot of different ways for us to kind of choreograph all these spaces, and art and placemaking and signage kind of bind all of this together. So keep going, Holland. And we did, I don't know, about 100 pages of this. So we're just going to show one. But this idea of breaking down how people spend time. Again, no one wants to live in a mall. So people are going to be living here, shopping here, eating here, working here. And it has a 24-hour lifespan. So how do you break apart that? How do you start to say, okay, this person is only using these series of spaces for this long? How do we capture their attention? How do we give them something unique to see 5 days a week, 365 days a year, versus the person that lives here? And again, they don't want a ton of signage everywhere. They don't want to feel like they're living somewhere too commercial. So how do you turn down the volume on those types of spaces? We can keep going. So for us, it's like, how do you design for people in mind? We're not just designing a thing, we're designing for people. So we have to make sure that we're understanding that human experience. We can keep going home. And that idea of how do we engage people? Everyone has these, what we call kind of the four human needs, the basic human needs. And again, for us, we want to make sure that they can connect to a story, that every place has a story worth telling. We want to make sure that they physically feel something when they're walking through the project, that they can feel the pride and the care that that someone designed a space for them, right? But there's also how do you connect people together, or how do you connect people to a story? And at the end of it, this idea of spiritual connection, this idea of how do you inspire people, that's really, really important to us. We can keep going. I know we're running short of time. So we do a lot of work with the developer on signage and graphics, which we've already seen today, but we also help them with the overall planning of art, placemaking. How do you start to layer in different kinds of meeting from different kinds of voices? We're only one voice. So we think that projects like this have to have a lot of different voices to make them really authentic. So keep going. And the idea that when we use this idea of storytelling can come in a lot of different forms. Our client was super amazing. He was a great visionary. And he said, Cody, make sure there's like 1,000 Easter eggs in this project. That's what he always called them, Easter eggs. And he said, you have to make sure that no matter what, whoever comes here for a dinner or whoever lives here can see something different every time they come. So we hid things everywhere. So he was a big musician. So we hid lyrics from all his favorite music. We hid like quotes and like unexpected places. So everything that you're seeing, we curated. We told, we designed a lot of it, but we also told artists, okay, put something here based on this idea, right? And so then the artists, we went out and we helped the client kind of curate artists. We can keep going on. And we started to then layer in all of these objects within the space. So again, things were easy to find and some things were hard to find. The client said, okay, he called me one day and said, I really want to do a haiku. I'm like, okay, great. A haiku. Awesome. So he commissioned a haiku and he said, can you do something interesting that's never been done with a haiku? I was like, I'll give it a shot. So we basically hid each of the different couplets, right? A haiku is based on couplets, like hid them everywhere. And we turned them into a QR code. So you had to basically find them and to piece the whole thing together. And in some cases, we wanted to commit to this idea that people had to connect together to find them. So it took 2 to 3 people to basically put their phones together, find the same QR code so they could unlock it together and create, again, conversation and meaning together. So kind of fun little things like that. So here you see some of them throughout the space. Some were really easy to find. Some were almost impossible to find, but he liked it that way. So you can keep going. But again, it was another way to kind of tell a story. We did a lot of programming with local artists. It was really important for them to have a lot of local artistry. Again, we curate where does it go? Because you have to plan these things. So we worked with the developer and the artist on saying, okay, this is your canvas, go for it, make it amazing. And so you see a lot of these things. We use them for what we call intuitive wayfinding, meaning as little as we could put in the environment. Like, I don't want a sign everywhere. So I want art. So in this case, the upper left is a parking garage, and that artist, who's an amazing artist, every level he did a custom mural about the level that you're on. Again, little kind of touches to make it feel like curated and crafted. So kind of every turn, even the ones in the bathroom stall were amazing. They're like super bizarre and weird, but I've never worked with an artist paint the bathroom stall, but it was super fantastic. So again, it's the idea of kind of celebrating people down to the street signs. We wanted to celebrate, local heroes and writers and scientists that were really in the area that needed to be, their story needed to be told. So I think that's kind of the last page, and we'll hand it back to Holland for the last
Awesome.
Q&A section.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cody and Ray and Jonah. Now it's time for us to move into a time of questions. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A feature that I was talking about earlier. But I will start us off with the first one. Someone asks, how do you design for longevity in environments that constantly change? As populations or cultures shift, how do you build flexibility into systems that age gracefully rather than become obsolete? Cody, do you want to take that one?
Sure. You did. Did you pick the oldest person for that question? That's a good old person question.
No.
Okay, so that's a great question because most of our projects are built over a long period of time. I would say the fastest is 2 years. The longest is maybe 25, 30 years for larger community-based projects. And you do have to design for the future. So there's a lot of different things, and it's probably too much time to go into like all the different kind of methodologies. But for us, we know that signage changes. And so we always are building into what's the flexibility that needs to happen for our clients. And sometimes that's messaging, right? So we have to say, okay, there's a future phase that's going to happen in a year, 10 years. How do we build today for flexibility? So that all starts really with understanding what the client's goal is for the project. It understands who the market is because, and again, we work on projects where there's like, okay, the first phase might be a younger market. It might be first to market, families that are moving in. And that has a very different need and vibe than maybe the future phase, which is an older, what we call like cool oldies, right? Like, a little bit older than me, but retirement, age. Again, those are different needs. So it all starts at the beginning. So we always try to dive into what our client is thinking, but also the market in which they're designing for.
Love it. Ray or Jonah, feel free to chime in if you have any additional thoughts on any of these.
For the timelessness kind of question, I think at least my experience of that, like I'm obviously, I don't know, I'm a younger designer, but like being able to look back and see kind of trends of history of like how things were done and see how those things have changed and then like what has been through lines of that, to then be able to have that inform the future. So that's more of a like brand specific one of like, usually it means like less expression, but you can still like build in expression like in a different way if it's like the color palette is really expressive, but the word mark itself is more pared back, like kind of pulling those things in tension, moving those levers per se.
Nice. I have a question I think Ray could help me answer. It says, how do you think about human scale when working with large architecture firms?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it kind of comes down to we want to have different kinds of scales of things, especially when we're thinking about the whole experience of, are you arriving by a car? Is that, you need something that's larger scale as you're entering that. And then, once you're more on the site, you want to have it be a little bit more intimately scaled. And I think that also changes from project to project. Like a lot of time in something like a big mixed use project, you want something that feels a little bit larger than life and expressive and take up some of the architecture or landscaping. And sometimes you are on projects a lot of the time in hospitality where you want it to feel a lot more bespoke and integrated with the architecture itself. So it kind of depends on the goal of the narrative and how much artistic expression you want. But it's all about putting yourself in the shoes of the person that is going to be experiencing this, and it comes down to the needs. And a lot of the things that we do is just getting people from point A to point B. And so really just kind of looking at all of those things really help drive the scale of what we're doing.
Thanks. Um, Cody, someone asked who authored the haikus for Uncommons.
I don't have it in my head, but I can find out.
We
Maybe
can
just
find out.
share. Yeah, we can. Maybe if that person would share their information with you, Holland, I can find out.
Yes, Pamela, we will get back to you. I have another question from Sam that I think everyone could chime in on. What is a client you haven't worked with but would be a dream project or client to work with at RSM?
I saw this one. I think my answer is less of a specific client and just more project based. I think that's probably also going to be different from designer to designer. Um, I would love to do some museum based projects and be a part of some more exhibition designs. I think that is always really interesting. I'm working on something kind of like that right now, where it's a lot of telling a historical story of something, and that gives a lot of meaning, and it's really great to be able to really literally tell someone else's story in a graphic sense.
I think in terms of brand and kind of doing brand design, I come from a background in apparel and clothing, and I just think RSM's process is so beautiful and would love to see that applied to a brand. And I feel like it would be really robust. We have done it with, I think I more specifically mean apparel, and I think we even have touched that a little bit. But yeah, just like it'd be cool to see what that would look like. So
Cody, any dream clients or projects?
Outside of the ones that pay me on time, let's see. I don't know. I mean, I would say the same as Ray is. It's more of like the ideal, and my ideal is the one that is passionate about design. Every client has objectives, right? And some of those are financial, some of those are social, like, they're development driven, right? Or if we're working with a hospital, they're patient experience driven or, patient outcome driven. So I think at the end of it, design is design. It's fairly universal. So someone who loves design, who's passionate about that and that it has meaning.
Totally. Someone asks, how do you incorporate environmental sustainability? Cody, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, there's a few different ways. Let's bookend it. On the front end, it's really strategy. So I think we want the least amount of things in the ground as possible. So smart strategy, smart planning, really rolling up our sleeves and working with architects and planners and landscape designers and saying, okay, what else in the space could be a navigation point? It could be building, it could be lighting, it could be sound, it could be kind of anything. So that idea of how are you building more than just 500 signs in an environment? Nobody wants that. We don't even want that. So at the end of it, smart signage, smart strategy, understanding how you could collectively choreograph a lot of different objects within the space to do the same thing the sign could do. And it feels like a city, it feels more authentic. The second part of it is materiality. So I think materiality in our world, we are, again, I've been in this industry for like 35 years, and most of our, materials that we deal with are on like less than this many fingers. So now we're trying to say, okay, we're going to move past like low VOC. We're going to move past like really recycled aluminum. We're going to move past all these really basic things that we've been dealing with for most of our career. How can we find inventive materials? So that idea of like a lot of eco materials, a lot of like natural materials or recycled or upcycled materials. A lot of clients are kind of getting into that. So for us, it's like it has to be driven by the outcome and the maintenance, but we're seeing a lot of shifts in the industry.
Mhm. I have another question that asks, since you all are in the early parts of your career, what do you look for in new designer portfolios? What's important for you to see? Right? You want to go ahead and
Yeah.
then others can chime in?
Yeah, for me, it's all about your process. I think, you can show a beautiful design, but if I can't see where you got it, I think being able to sell your design and really showing me that no stones are left unturned, you've really done research, you've really gone through a process and tried different things. It's also you know, a lot of it is we come up with a lot of designs that we favor and the client picks a different one. So a lot of time it's not our favorite design, but it's the one that works the best for the client. So showing solutions that are truly solving a problem and showing how you got there. I would just say the process is the number one thing that I look at when looking at all of those things and just being here as well.
I think the other thing, those are great, Ray. I taught portfolio studio at Art Center for, I don't know, maybe 15 years. And I think one of the things that I kept telling all my students over and over again is it's not the work. The work is the baseline, right? The work is just you're expected to be good, right? And that's just the nature of all our design agencies coming out there and design curriculums are you guys are leaving as great designers. So that's a baseline. So now what? So at the end of it, for us, curiosity, open mindset, and being able to be nimble, work with people well, work in a team. Um, it's pretty basic. You can teach skills. Skills are changing literally every week. I mean, Ray and Jonah, they're kind of like way more adept at the skill-based stuff, but stuff is changing so fast. So, but I can't teach someone to be curious. So I think you, again, keep it simple and keep an open mind.
I was gonna say something along the lines of like this is kind of a weird one, but like that you are working on personal projects. I think that kind of ties into the curiosity and being like, oh, I just was interested in this thing. And so I explored it. It kind of shows that you have a personal practice. And I think being really clear about that too, not hiding it and being like, oh, I expect this client or whatever. It's like, no, I worked on this for fun because I wanted to learn what would happen if I did whatever thing, you know? Um, and again, like really taking your process as your own and um, just like being hungry for design, having that curiosity and care and like continually making work even when someone's not paying you.
Nice. I have a question from Teresa that asks, what advice do you have for a student who has experience in brand design but wants to transition into more environmental design work? Ray, I feel like you could probably speak to that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's start looking at the things that you've designed and what environments would that brand live in. You know, for example, if you designed a logo for a coffee shop, start thinking about how would that then be applied to an actual coffee shop and just start, kind of thinking about how brands um, could be integrated into an environment and just start creating examples like that in things that you've done already to show that you've thought about it. I mean, we get people all the time who apply who haven't done environmental design, but they have done brand design. And as long as they can say, I know that this brand feels sophisticated, so the materials probably want to be more of a refined metal or maybe some deeper woods. And, it's just understanding how a brand then gets translated into all of these other things like lighting or paint colors or, what kind of sign does it want to be neon or does it want to be more of a, acrylic? It just kind of those things of, how does that narrative just keep translating into more of an environmental sense and just start exploring your own work.
Nice. I have a question from Deborah that says, you spoke briefly about your use of AI. So how do you see AI evolving into EGD and the work you do? And I would also say we could answer that on the brand side as well. So whoever wants to take that one first.
I can start. I think the way that I think about AI, like I think of it as a tool, like it's another skill, another thing in your back pocket to be able to be used. Um, I think it becomes problematic when you try to get it to replace your work rather than using it as a tool in your toolbox to like aid you in your work. You know, it's like from a hand screwdriver to a drill. Like it's an upgrade in a tool in some sense, but um, I think using it to be able to create tools, like I have used it a lot to create like InDesign scripts that I would have never had the ability to create beforehand or using it to create tools in the code like in code language that I personally don't know. And I think one, it doesn't do a good job, and two, it gets problematic when you just say like design me a logo for this and here are the brand filters. Like one, it's done a bad job of that. I've tried to do it just to see what it's like. And two, I think it's like there's so much more information about a project and being an embodied person that a computer, like the amount of RAM that our brains have is exponentially more than a computer will ever have. And the experience of being embodied, being a human that can see and touch and feel and taste and smell things will like inevitably translate into design where AI never will be able to.
Yeah, exactly. I would just piggybacking off of it's a tool. I mean, we use it all the time. And for example, on Black Desert Resort, we design the signs, but then we need to show some context. And of course, we can Photoshop all of that, or we can, have something create a background for us to use, or, oh, I need a texture, but I can't find the right thing. It's those kinds of things that are just streamlining the process, but it's not replacing it altogether. And we've tried even as an experiment, let's see if it can do it. Let's have it design a sign for this. And it's just never as good. It's never going to be, that. It's just using it as something to streamline the process.
Cool. I have a question from Tom that asks, what's the most misunderstood thing about environmental graphic design by clients? Do you want to kick us off on that, Cody?
I maybe clarify the question. Could you read it again?
What's the most misunderstood thing about environmental graphic design by clients? So what are our clients' misunderstanding about what we do?
I would
Oh,
say it's that you don't need it. You definitely need it.
that's a great response.
I think clients are often like, I don't want signage. I don't, we don't need it, but there's ways to do it in a way that is very artful and it enhances the overall experience.
Awesome. Someone asks, how are projects divided at RSM? Do people often work on multiple projects or is it a more focused work process?
I can
Ray, you
start it
want to
off.
take that? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Multiple projects for sure. I think right now, for example, I think I have about 15 projects, but it's not happening all at once. It's just ones, like Cody said, a lot of these projects are anywhere from 2 years to 10 years. And so in that time, there's different phases of a project. And so we'll be working on, a concept deck for a couple weeks, a few days of that week, and then we kind of wait for a process and maybe we're continuing the next month. So it's not a continued, you're working on this project for 2 weeks straight. It's more you're overlapping. Oh, I'm going to work on this brand for 2 hours today, or oh, I'm going to switch to this one. It's kind of project per project of what that phasing is like, but you will always have different kinds of projects at the same time, which is honestly always great because a lot of time you learn something from one project that you can take to another one. And it's good to kind of bounce off of, I'm working on a hospitality project. Now I'm going to work on a restaurant or a retail center. And it kind of gives your brain time to kind of rethink things in different perspectives.
Love it. And I'll have us answer one last question. Someone asked, how many hours a day are you typically working, and what are some of the project deadlines like? Jonah, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. We all work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And so I guess 8 hours a day, but it depends, like our process and studio, like we have a lot of beautiful things that we'll do, like this thing called a weekly wow, which is like we'll have some sort of presentation or some sort of like inspirational thing that is like a rotating schedule. So the hours like sitting and doing projects is probably around like 4 days a week, and then that's not like we get Friday off. It's like sprinkled throughout those things. And yeah, time, like deadlines and stuff, it depends on the project, and those are set, and then we just kind of follow those. So um yeah, hopefully that
Nice.
answers the question.
Nice. It's 4 o'clock on the dot, so I will get us out of here. Any unanswered questions, we will reach out to you guys and get those answered for you. So don't let the time hold you back if you have additional questions. Once you guys exit out of this, the program that hosts this webinar will send you an email with a survey. This is just for us to get feedback on today's webinar, and also it's a space for you to ask more questions or connect with us further. Also, if you fill out the survey, you'll be entered into a raffle. We're going to have 3 winners of the raffle. And you will receive our custom RSM Design puzzle that we made this year. Has a lot of fun Easter eggs and goodies in there. And then you'll also receive a $100 MoMA design gift card, which is pretty awesome. High ticket item. But thank you guys so much. Today was so fun. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
everyone.
Thanks for all the good questions. Awesome.
Yes, yes. Goodbye, goodbye. Have a great day.